My name is Joyce Hsiang. I'm an architect, an urbanist, and an assistant professor at Yale School of Architecture.
And I'm Bimal Mendis. I am also, like Joyce, an architect and urbanist, an assistant professor and assistant dean at the Yale School of Architecture. I was born in Sri Lanka and grew up in Zambia and Zimbabwe before studying and working in the States.
I was born in Taiwan and grew up in the US, and we actually met in college we were both undergrads studying architecture. We were friends for 10 years before, and we took all these classes together and studied together, and and so school and architecture actually brought us from two very different parts of the world together. Right. We founded our design and research studio, Plan B Architecture and Urbanism, in New Haven in 2008. We had before this been working in a lot of different offices, and we founded it really to anticipate and think about new relationships between humans and the earth. A lot of our work uses the ways that we work as architects and cartographic analysis to make worlds that reveal and reflect upon the way humans have urbanized the planet.
We found that often plan A never works and one always has to pivot, particularly in these kinds of changing crises and the kind of transformations that are taking place. So plan B seemed like a very generic but appropriate term to kind of latch onto as the kind of concept for practice as well. We're always operating within this state of adapting to different conditions and scenarios. And for us, that flexibility, being forced to be nimble in our practice and the way we work, was important for us. I think one of our first and perhaps most comprehensive projects was called the City of 7 Billion, which looked at the impacts of urbanization at the planetary scale, so very broad scale research and investigation into what it means to live within an urban planet and how is the planet urbanized. So through that we examined different kinds of modes of representation that looked at and tried to make sense of what it means to be not just an urbanized planet, but also what that urbanization was leading to. So the idea of a city at the planetary scale became something that we looked at. So that was one of our early projects. But within that we also had a project that looked more focusedly at called The World Turned Inside Out, which posited ideas of inhabiting the world differently through notions of retreating, through reimagining strategies of kind of withdrawing from the ways in which we have been urbanized the planet. So in some ways, learning from one project led to speculations in the other.
And this past summer, we had a small kind of contribution to the Venice Biennale called The Earth After X-Billion. So that's almost 10 years after we had started the City of 7 Billion project. And it really is compositing and positing these kinds of analytic scenarios of what it means, maybe in response to a lot of the analysis and work that we've done previously.
But in these projects, we kind of use a lot of techniques of drawing. We look at big data sets and maps, but also try to find the human within those drawings as a kind of humanistic process as well. So not just getting lost in the data, but also trying to find ways in which we can capture someone's attention or encompass a worldview to kind of make sense in some ways of everything that is the complexity of what is going on, and distill that into more simple, tangible ways in which we can understand our place in the world.
I think related to that, on the one hand, there's this tension between the planetary scale and looking at the world and the necessity for us to consider things that extends and expands beyond these sort of administrative boundaries or national boundaries or city boundaries or local jurisdictions. But to then also be diving in and looking at these very specific conditions where these large abstract ideas and issues of overpopulation or population growth, resource consumption, climate change, how they materialize very locally, and how in some ways the kind of larger argument behind this, or the premise, is that no part of this world, even certainly here, especially here in East Iceland, is immune from these forces of urbanization, and to then look at these specific sites and conditions that are, I think, at the forefront and grappling with some of those challenges, where we can see the tension between the global and the local, the planetary and the kind of scale of the human, between what used to be called nature, and how we, as humanity, have become this kind of urban force.
So Terra Nova, reconstructs the landscapes of Iceland's kind of vanishing cryosphere. At least that's how we kind of began this premise of what is this kind of landscape and what is a new ground, the Terra Nova, that is either revealed or left behind or created through this. But in many ways, Terra Nova has been for us a way to kind of to see, to understand, to draw, to analyze the kind of complex environment around us, and the relationships, this very intertwined relationships between 2 or 3 close to us melting glaciers, the 2 river valleys. What we thought was 1 dam was actually 5 dams, and then the 2 reservoirs, and then the 2 valleys that are intertwined in the way in which the water has been moved and shaped through us. So it's been this kind of process of unraveling and understanding through that unraveling through our field notes and drawings and sketches, just to make sense of this environment, both in terms of what's happening more macroscopically in terms of global warming and the climate change, but what's also happening on the ground and the ways in which humans, that is us, we have transformed the ground through the lines and the dams and the cuts and the contours and the conduits that we have made to both move this glacial melted water across vast landscapes and kind of turn that into our own in some way. So this environment between what's natural and human is intertwined in a very complex way and has profound, I think, ramifications. So we have been trying to learn and understand from that, and some of the work takes on many forms, from diagrams to notes to sketches to images, and they try and reconstruct those relationships in some ways by distilling those connections and making them tangible. So in some cases, some of the drawings merely document or they try and ask a question. In other cases, the drawings take these tricks of perception, if you will, where what is in the distance, in the background, what is far, is made more legible by bringing it closer to the foreground, by foreshortening that distance. So for example, what might be a melting glacier in the background that is barely visible on a clear day, in a drawing you can make it bigger, it almost looms large, and you make the connections to a reservoir, to a dam, to the water that is flowing through it, to show this kind of relationships that sometimes feel intangible, but we make it legible through the drawing. And then the dioramas themselves become another way in which we construct these environments, environments that are almost fictions. The dam in some ways creates its own environment. When you're there, it's so vast and so big in its scale. It produces its own atmosphere, if you will. And the dioramas are another form of drawing that creates these kinds of environments where we kind of test the boundary between what is real and what is fiction, what is natural, what is man-made. And when you take a picture of it, you sometimes can't quite tell if it's real or if it's intangible, or if it's a fiction. So these are ways in which these kind of fictive environments, I think, are ways that kind of question the way in which we also consume these landscapes, both consume them for energy, but also consume them as symbols in this kind of era of mass tourism as well.
I mean, I think the larger premise of this project emerges maybe where a lot of the conversation around deglaciation and the melting of glaciers focuses entirely on scientific data of kilometers lost, sea level rise, freshwater supply, and how it affects seaside or oceanside communities in other parts of the world. And I think it struck us that when you speak of deglaciation, there's literally these vast tracts of land that are emerging, and all of the tensions of what exactly occurs in what is essentially new ground, literally new ground, which maybe here in Iceland is very, you're used to this, like there's volcanoes, there's constantly new ground being created. The idea of new ground is just baked into, literally into the crust here. But the fact that, as we are on the precipice of all these glaciers getting lost, there's a country's worth of land that's just being exposed, that are on these critical areas, these critical zones, that become, subject to these larger questions. Are these global commons? Are these places for, communities and species to continue to grow and to move upward? Do they become, places of extraction that are already being poised for whether creating energy? So a lot of this is looking at those sites and considering the implications of deglaciation literally on those kinds of footprints that exist here.
And there's a kind of, when we've been here and explored the different sites and learned from them, there's a kind of beauty that is both overwhelming, as has been written about by authors, particularly in Iceland, but also a beauty that is terrifying, perhaps to some, but also refreshingly, I think in the contemporary context, also somewhat mundane, in the sense that this idea of climate change is not something to be shocked by, as it sometimes is in other parts of the world and in the kind of media, or to be ignored, but rather something almost here to be worked with, that life sometimes goes on, and you work with the land in a way that's maybe new. And I feel like that's been going on for thousands of years. So that culture of how you work with the environment around you is very much implicit in the way in which it registers the human imprint in the landscape, and that's something that we've been trying to capture and draw from.
Our residency in this grant at Skriðuklaustri has been incredible. Transformative would be a word that I would use. Some of these topics we talk about in Broadway, I wake up, I look out the window, at this valley that's been sculpted by glaciers, deforested by Vikings, reforested in the last century, whose trees have been cut through to have power lines that literally connect Europe's largest ice cap with an aluminum production plant based in Pittsburgh. I mean, that's in one view when I wake up. So being here, surrounded by this profound landscape, immersed in the physical realities, material conditions, and atmospheric phenomena of this environment, where we can see and experience and reckon with the way the planet has shaped the Earth, the way humans have adapted to be able to live here under extreme and seemingly improbable conditions, and the way humans are now reshaping the planet. That is just allows us to be here, to study, to learn, and to ask, where and how do you even begin to find the wisdom to address these contradictory and complex forces? This is what being here at Skriðuklaustri with this residency and grant has given us the space and time to consider, that I think is, extraordinary for us, but important, incredibly, for this larger questions of how humans have reshaped the planet and how the plants have shaped and changed the way humans are living, and what we do as we look forward.
I mean, it's rare to find an opportunity to feel so immersed in an environment, but also one that feels very connected to the environment in very tangible ways, and both as a center that brings people to it, that has a kind of whole history that is again connected to Iceland, but also through the writings of the author to the kind of natural landscapes that have been transforming over time. And I think that's implicit in a lot of the writing, that the nature and the surrounding environment is overwhelming, but a kind of protagonist in many of the stories. And we see that story playing out as well when we're here, and part of feeds into our research, but a real privilege to feel like we are part of something that has been going on for a while, and to be nourished and nurtured by it has been a unique opportunity, one we will never forget, and hopefully one that will propel us into the next things that we do.